Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through the industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Erin Curran. She's a digital publicist and podcast guest campaigning specialist, and we'll be talking about how entrepreneurs can leverage podcast guest marketing and boost their business. Welcome to the show, Erin.
Thank you, Ajay. Thanks for having me on.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to India, and I'm sure not just in India but all across the globe, wherever this show is either heard, seen, or read about in a blog post later on. People are able to benefit from this, and today's master is you, Erin, and we'll be talking about how can one use. But to understand about, a lot of people have heard about podcast guesting. What is podcast guest marketing if one has to understand from a simple layman's terms? Yes, Erin, can you hear me? Is there a... Looks like there is... Sometimes some technicalities can make this happen. I can see Erin backstage, but not connected in the show. Let her come back. So we will be talking about how entrepreneurs can leverage podcast guest marketing. And today, nowadays, this whole podcasting, it's all become a big tool today. And those people who are using this tool can make a lot of benefit, and especially small businesses, entrepreneurs. That is going to be the big thing coming forward. So I'm just waiting for Erin to come back, and let's see. Hopefully she will be back any moment. So I'm just waiting. Don't know. Okay. Yeah. So let's wait. Maybe some technical error at her site. We'll just wait. In the meantime, we will play some. Let me see. We will play you some KJ tune. I am just waiting for Erin. What I don't know what has happened. I have not got any message. Suddenly, while talking, there seems to have been a problem. Maybe I don't know what's. So what I'll do is I'll log out for now, and as soon as I get back her, I will try and log back in. So yeah, she's back. Erin is. Yeah, Erin, what happened?
I don't know. It said page unresponsive and the stream crashed. I'm not sure. These things do come up though. So
Yes, no problem at all. I was trying to hold fort. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, so no problem at all. It happens, and this is the good part. This is the other side of technology. It helps connect, and sometimes it can disconnect. Because
Exactly.
so many things happen in between this thing, but most of the time it is like it is such a wonderful thing that it helps you connect in the best manner. Not only the way we are able to talk, but the way a lot of people, a lot of podcast guests can actually make use of their technology and
Yeah.
make use of this whole thing called podcast guest marketing. So my first question was, Erin,
Yes.
for the common person's understanding is that they have heard about podcasting, podcast guesting, and what is this podcast guest marketing? Let's
Yes.
start with this to understand from a common man's perspective.
Cool. So, podcast guest marketing is essentially getting featured on a series of podcasts that are right for your ideal client. So, the ones which your ideal client are tuning into. And with podcast guest marketing, when you're a guest on a podcast, you can share your story, your value, like bring proper value to that listener, and they'll get to know you on a much more personal level than they might if it was another form of PR. Say if it was a written interview, they'll actually get to hear your voice and feel a sense of connection with you, and then there's trust established. So it's quite an amazing form of PR/marketing.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, who is this podcast guesting for? Because is there a particular sector type of people who can make the best use of it, or it is something that a huge number of people in different sectors can make use of it? What has been your understanding as a podcast guest campaigning specialist?
Yeah, so I mostly work with entrepreneurs, coaches, and course creators who have digital products that they can sell. But I believe that you can utilize this form of marketing with any industry you're in or any type of job you're in if you're an entrepreneur, because you are allowing people to get to know you on a deeper level. So it's going to attract in clients. So yeah, regardless of what market you're in, I think it can be beneficial for everyone. So yeah, it's everyone can use it. It's amazing.
Right, absolutely. So now let's sometimes, you are into this line, Erin, and a lot of times, people are saying podcasting is growing, podcasting is growing.
Yeah.
Sometimes some reports come in that, okay, sometimes Spotify has fired 200 people, for more people and all. So how does it impact you as a person who is into this line? Secondly, how should entrepreneurs and people who want to use podcast guesting as a medium should take it? Because they may get dissuaded over tomorrow. This whole effort that I'm trying to build may not be able to, bear me fruit. It may just not be useful to me in the future because the line itself, the podcast guesting line itself may not exist by the time I come to know about it and make a name for myself. I wanted to understand your sense about this sort of coverage or things that gets talked in the media.
Yeah, so I think that what you have to bear in mind is that sometimes you might not think you're making much of an impact if you were to guest on maybe a smaller podcast or something, because you'd say there might be only 200 listeners, whatever it is. But what you have to think about is the quality of the podcast and the audience. For example, if you had a sustainable fashion brand and you wanted to market yourself on a range of podcasts, you might pitch yourself to a really big podcast, but the audience might be so dispersed and they might not be completely into sustainable fashion or whatever it is. So you might have no one that's interested in what you have to say as much as if you pitch yourself to a smaller podcast with a more loyal listenership who are really passionate about what you have to say. And sometimes I've known it to be true that the smaller podcasts can actually have better conversion rates and have more lead generation with them. So you just never know, really. But it's always worth getting yourself on as many podcasts as you can, as many of the right kind of podcasts, because that's when you'll see real results rather than just one podcast. That might bring you some results, but realistically over time, the more podcasts you're on, the more you're going to increase your visibility and become known. And it's not necessarily always about generating leads. It can also, the return on investment doesn't have to just be monetary. Like, it definitely can, and I've seen results too, but it can also be about building your reputation, getting known. You might find that after you featured on a series of podcasts, you can increase your following on social media, and there's so many other benefits to it. You can also repurpose repurpose bits of the podcast into content and share them on social media. So it has such a range of benefits that sometimes you don't even realize sometimes, so yeah.
Right, right. So the entrepreneurs or coaches or all your different type of clients that come to you,
Yeah.
what are their questions to you generally in terms of podcast guesting? Help us understand, because this will give us an idea into the type of thought process that they have, apprehensions they have about. Some people, they say, it's very difficult for me, I am an introvert, I may not be able to speak too much,
Yeah.
how will I talk about the business, even though the person is very good in their business. And
Yeah.
what are the type of questions they have? Because these are the questions that I think one can have. But what about you? What is the questions that you get, and how do you convince them that don't miss out on this big opportunity called podcast guest marketing?
100%. Well, I think that quite a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs have this idea that, only, big industry leaders get featured on podcasts, or they might think, what if I make a mistake, or I'm not experienced enough with talking on podcasts? And I think the key here is to just recognize that those are limiting beliefs. So what I like to do is I like to find evidence against that limiting belief and show it to them. For instance, only big industry leaders get featured on podcasts. You will find on Spotify there are a ton of smaller industry leaders or just unknown business owners that are starting to get featured on podcasts. So you've just got to find the evidence that sort of combats that limiting belief and recognize that your voice is really powerful and your story and experience is unique. So I think that just overcoming those limiting beliefs and allowing yourself to see that more beneficial perspective will help you feel like you're able to get on more podcasts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, in terms of podcast guesting, you talk about that, okay, this is something you should benefit from. But then every entrepreneur or every podcast guest or aspirant, they may have their own sense of understanding about how to land some good podcast opportunities. You tell me, for them, people who are looking to be podcast guests, is what are the secrets of landing good podcast opportunities? Because I can tell you many ways because of which I never select a guest. And it may not have nothing to do with their expertise. There are so many things, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I would say the first thing is, a lot of the reasons that pitches get ignored is because they're not personalized enough. Some people like to kind of write cookie cutter emails and put them out there. Have me as a guest, have me. But the key is to actually listen to an episode or two of the podcast you're about to pitch to. Really listen to it and tell the host what it is that you like about the podcast, because that will make you stand out from the crowd much more, because you're really showing that you understand the podcast, you listen to it, you care about it. So first, I think that is one key to getting landed, really. And then the other thing would be to tell the host how you're going to bring value to the listener. So often pitching to podcasts, people want to just talk about themselves. Me, I'm so good at this, I'm so good at that. But what we need to remember is, how are we going to serve the podcast listeners, the audience? Because that's where the gold is. That's what people want to hear. People tune into podcasts because they want to learn something. They want to be entertained. Most of the time they want to learn something. So what can you teach the podcast listeners? Let the podcast host know that. And that is going to increase your chances of landing a guest feature on that podcast. And then another tip I would give would be to follow up, because some people don't follow up, and there might be these beliefs again around, they don't want to hear from me, or I'm getting ignored. But a lot of the time, messages and emails get lost. So just following up, assume the best, assume that the podcast host has just missed your email and hasn't got round to it yet, and send a gentle reminder to follow up and say, hey, just checking you received my message. And you know what, Ajay? Most of my podcasts I've landed through following up. There was one client I landed her, like, I think I had 4 podcasts interested in having her as a guest in a week. And all of them were because I followed up, every single one of them. So there's a lot of power in following up your pitch, and just never underestimate that.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, Erin. That's a very great point you have mentioned, and I can see you that you are able to follow up with the podcast host without intruding too much, and
Yeah.
without making it feel as if you are just demanding something. Sometimes, a lot of podcast hosts are quite busy because
Yeah.
they sound like a big podcast host, but there is a single person or a 2-person team, and that they need to work for to do everything from from
Mm-hmm.
talking about the initial appointment and fixing and to the social media. So sometimes it may not be. In fact, one more point I wanted to take this opportunity to mention is that for the guests, they should always ensure the type of relationships that their agency or the people who are representing them are building with the podcast hosts.
Mm-hmm.
Many a times I have seen that even among big agencies, and that is where smaller agencies or people who are actually handling it themselves, like you, or with a small team, they are much better in terms of representing a podcast guest.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes what happens is that even if the agency is quite big, the person who is representing the client may not be that experienced.
Mm.
And that is the problem with things like a person like me will find it very difficult when there is too much of back and forth.
Yeah.
In podcasting, there is not much of a scope because one has to be very clear about the timings if you are in different time zones,
Yeah.
about the culture that the podcast host might be from a different culture altogether. Their understanding of communication might be totally different than what you are using in your local level. That may not be the same. And thirdly is that if the podcast agency is not able to represent you as a podcast guest properly, it spoils your relationship forever. So
Mm-hmm.
you should know as a podcast guest the type of relationship that your representatives are building with the podcast guests. If they
Mm.
are not, you will be blacklisted, and you will not because you are lacking anything, but or you are not a top podcast guest, but because your agency has not been able to represent you the way or as professionally as it should be. This is one thing I have found after doing more than 500 live shows, and that is where people, as you said about follow up, it is so important,
Yeah.
so necessary,
Mm.
that that personalized understanding or service that one not only gives to the client who is the podcast guest, but also to the host, that there is a human on the other side who is trying to add value to the podcast industry, and not something to be fully extracted like the golden goose. It cannot done. That goose has to survive and give a golden egg every day, rather than just one. So that was my thought. I thought I take this opportunity to share, because a lot of people who listen to it, even the podcast guests, even others, they should be able to know what exactly and how things work on the ground. Now, coming to the podcasting itself, Erin, how did you land up into this line as a podcast guest campaigning specialist? I've read about in your profile. It was the breakdown in your car that led to this. You know that
Yeah.
that is but you see, that gives a perspective how podcasting can impact life. Like I myself
Yeah.
have my own story, and it can in your case it was the breakdown of your car. In my case it was something else. but it has given me a new perspective about how I can assimilate all my skills, my knowledge, my understanding, my work experience into something very tangible
Yeah.
and give back to not only the guest but also to the podcasting industry itself. And when giving back, you are the one who is getting the most. Tell us about your story.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Ajay. So yeah, I was kind of having a breakdown in my car one day because things were getting too much for me. I think there was a breakup, I was having difficulties at work. But you know what really helped me get through it was actually listening to podcasts because you can learn so much from listening to podcasts that talk about issues that you're currently struggling with. And I found that I got so much value from certain podcast episodes that I listened to. I listened to a lot of personal development podcasts, which helped me to sort of manage my mind and overcome obstacles. And they helped me to feel better too. And it's very therapeutic for a lot of people, especially in that, if you're going through emotional difficulty, it can be really helpful. So that's how I sort of really got my teeth stuck into feeling connected to podcasts. But I actually did a degree at uni. I did media and communication, and I hadn't used it for quite a long time. But it was quite a while back. I saw a job opportunity from an actress and entrepreneur, and she said, "I'm looking for a podcast pitcher, somebody who can pitch me to podcasts because I don't have." She was kind of not struggling with time, but sort of like she wanted to focus on other areas of her business, and I saw the advert and I thought, that is so me. I was like, I love podcasts. I have a degree. Let's blend the two together. So I applied for it. I got that role and I just completely fell in love with pitching to podcasts and fell in love with the whole process and the type of work. I thought I was good at communication and I had a real passion to actually listen to podcasts before pitching, like genuinely be engaged with it. So it's just something I naturally fell into and thought, I want to serve more people now and get people featured as guests on podcasts because they can make such a big difference to people's lives. You have no idea who you're impacting when you're a guest on a podcast, whose heart you're touching and whose also, value that you're sharing that can genuinely help people in some way, whether it be personal development or business. So that's how I got into podcast guest marketing.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is the type of story that makes many stories, and people want stories of authenticity. So talking of authenticity, Erin, is that as podcast guests, we keep on talking about, to be authentic. Even we should be authentic about things, and especially for me, I don't have to try anything because that's the person I am. I will speak straight. I will be the way I am, and that works in a person in my favor because I do not need to do anything extra.
Yeah.
But sometimes what happens is that people think that doing something extra might build up their thought leadership or their influence, especially in podcasts, and that is one thing one should avoid. But that was the host part. What about the guest? How would you like to put up the authenticity part? How guests should look at their expertise, that they are the guest and they are there because of their expertise, of what they have done already, of what, or in terms of the solutions that they provide to people, in terms of the impact that they will be having on numerous a number of people in the future, not only just the day when the podcast is getting aired live. But so how would you like to put the authenticity part of them? Sometimes people, even without knowing, they just might move away from that authentic part and move on to adding something shiny into their mannerism, into their message delivery. What would you like to tell them?
Yeah, I'd say, do you know what? It's Ajay, it's kind of a blend of bringing authenticity and expertise. So you just really have to show up as you are, as yourself, because who else are you going to be? There's no point in putting a front on because people will want to work with you because of your natural essence. But yeah, it is about bringing expertise too. What I tend to recommend is just if you're nervous about podcast guesting, or if you're thinking, how can I bring expertise on a podcast as a guest? I would say preparation could be really key here in helping you to do that. Just writing down on a piece of paper or on your laptop how you can bring value to people, what you can really teach people that will help them, just and kind of storing that in your mind, or just even having it on the side of your laptop if you're really nervous, if you're really not sure about how to bring value, just having it written down and just in your mind, and know that know that you can kind of speak naturally as your authentic self, but also talk about your experience and just the expertise that you have to share. Written down, it will help you so much. And especially if you practice it yourself, go over the possible questions they might ask you, and you'll start to feel both more confident and like you can sprinkle your real self into the conversation. So it's kind of a blend, really. I think, you can't, it's not one or the other. It's not like completely be myself and forget about what I have to share, or it's not just share this and that robotically. It is about a combination of both.
Absolutely. I like that line you said, sprinkling your true self into the conversation that you are going to have. That's a great line. You should utilize it more for the client. And that's actually, that they will understand much, much better, much, much emphatically. So in my last question is, there are so many people who would like to know more about what you do, how you do, and if also they may want to be your client. How do they connect with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So you can connect with me by following me on Instagram. My Instagram handle is @ErinCurranUK. And if you DM me, direct message me with the word guide, I'll send you a free guide on how to increase your visibility as an entrepreneur after you've featured as a guest on podcast. So it's about how to kind of amplify that visibility even more. So you can connect with me there on Instagram, or you can send me an email. My email address is erincurranuk@gmail.com. And I'm open to just chatting to people about this as well, because I'm very passionate about it, and not a lot of people know about, the ins and outs of podcast guest marketing, but I genuinely think it can help so many people with their business. So
Wonderful. With the message that you just gave, sprinkling your true self in the conversations that you have, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
thanks for having me, AJ.